Hi everyone, welcome to the Basketball Victoria Finance webinar that we're hosting today. This is the first in a series of webinars that BV will be delivering over the coming months, which we hope will offer some support and some guidance on some of the issues that are pressing at the moment. For those who don't know, my name's Pahl. I'm the General Manager of Business Services at Basketball Victoria. Relatively new to the role, just started in January, and have certainly had a baptism of fire these last couple of months. Got experience across a number of industries, finance experience, including sporting clubs. Previously been the CFO at Adelaide United Soccer Club, the A-League club, which is obviously a big club, 10,000 plus members, but also currently the treasurer of my local AFL Super Rules team club. So 100 members as opposed to 10,000 members, so I know big and small club and what's involved in both. Similarly, today's attendees range from small clubs with a couple of teams right through to some of the biggest basketball associations in Australia. So it makes it difficult to prepare a webinar that's going to suit everyone. So today's topics will be quite general. So some people with finance backgrounds may find it a little simple, but hopefully we can still deliver something and everyone gets something out of the session. Following the session, we'll look to put out a survey or get some feedback to identify issues that you're all facing. And if we get a common theme, we might run some separate sessions that are a bit more tailored to those particular items. If I can ask everyone just to stay muted, and if you've got questions, if you can use the chat function, we'll try and answer some questions at the end of the session, and Matt McIntosh will help me sort of navigate that throughout. So today we're going to cover off a few things. We're going to start with financial reporting structures and talk through some of that, the best ways to set up as a club, what sort of reporting we should be doing. We'll explore some software solutions, what programs are good to use to get set up and make life a bit easier for treasurers and people running the finance departments at clubs and associations. We'll look at board or committee reporting and what we recommend we should be doing as a minimum. We'll delve into some financial statements, and then we'll look at budgeting and forecasting. The forecasting work will be a little more tailored around the current situation and some recommendations on what we should be doing around COVID-19. Around our initial response, and then our post-COVID-19 and our recovery, which is certainly not going to change overnight. It's going to be a bit of time to work through. So it's important that we forecast and look long-term. We'll also just cover off some financial controls as part of a committee, the things that we should be putting in place at our clubs and associations to make sure that we're doing things correctly. And then we'll throw open some questions at the end. So we'll start off financial reporting structure, some pretty generic sort of terms here, but good financial management begins with good financial information, understanding how it's put together, what it's telling you, and how you can use it to plan for the future. Obviously, profitability is not the core purpose of clubs, but it's necessary to ensure that the club is sustainable and properly funded. Clubs need to ensure that they have adequate cash flow to support operations, and COVID-19 has been a real life example of why we put money away for that rainy day situation. As we've spoken to associations, we've really been pleased to see that a lot of associations are in a good position. Obviously some better than others, some are really doing it tough, but that having that solid cash reserve really makes a difference when these times do strike. So that's good. By implementing good financial management, your club will deliver its strategic goals in a financially sound manner, and responsible management of financial resources is often the difference between clubs that are really successful and those that are less successful, and certainly between those that are no longer around at all. It's important to note, most committee structures will have a treasurer, and that person's generally responsible for the financial management and reporting of the club. But it's really important to remember that it's not just left to the treasurer. The whole management committee is responsible for the financial management of the club, and it's important that other members are involved and receiving information and working through plans, budgets, all those things. It's a team-based effort and not just left to one person. One of the responsibilities of the management committee is to ensure the club has good management practices in place to achieve the objectives of the club. The responsibility doesn't fall just to the treasurer, and the whole committee must be responsible. For larger clubs and associations, we recommend that you develop a finance subcommittee to assist the treasurer. And this will be a group that will sit outside of committee meetings and meet and work with the treasurer and then present to the wider committee. This will help take some of the pressure off the treasurer, but also help bring other ideas to the table and not leave everything to one person. Some of the questions here, we'll just put together a list of a few things that we can tick off as a management committee to make sure the club's in good shape. Things like, can we pay our bills when they're due? Can we fund the programs that we plan to run? And we're regularly reviewing our cash flow forecasts. Budgeting, we'll look at a little later in a bit more detail. Financial statements, are we keeping records appropriately? And is it maintained and reported on regularly? Are key financial accounts reconciled regularly? And then we look into things like preventing fraud and mismanagement. Are controls in place to safeguard assets such as our cash? Is money used in line with budgets? And are controls in place to approve spending? Also, some controls around how we do our banking. We'll touch on a little further later on as well. So really, accounting 101 stuff here, cash versus accrual method. This is probably more if you're starting up a club or your early days, or maybe the club's growing and you're reviewing how you do your reporting. Cash basis is a much simpler basis. This recognises revenue when cash is received and expenses when they're paid. We don't have accounts receivable or accounts payable under this method. Your smaller clubs would probably opt to use the cash basis, as it's quite simple to maintain. It's easy to determine when transactions have occurred, i.e. when the money goes out of the bank or comes in, and there's no need to track your payables and receivables. Cash method is also beneficial in terms of tracking your cash. So you always know what cash you have, because you're not sitting on a list of creditors or bills you haven't paid, or waiting on a heap of invoices to be paid to you. The accrual method takes a little bit more work. In this method, we record revenue and expenses as they're earned or incurred. So whether we've been paid or not, we record the revenue in our books. So when we send out invoices at the start of the season, we would record the revenue then, and then rather than when we get paid. So not when the cash comes in. This method is obviously, it's more commonly used, and it's, as we get bigger, it's certainly a better way to manage your accounts. The upside, it gives a more realistic idea of your income and expenses during a period, and therefore helps you paint the long-term picture of the club that cash accounting can't do for you. The downside is that you do need to do this in conjunction with cash flow reports, because you're not as in touch with your cash. We can appear to be really profitable, but have no money in the bank. Without careful monitoring, it can be a bit of a dangerous one. So this one does require a bit more knowledge and a bit more work from an accounting point of view. If you're trying to work out which methods best suits your club, a few things to think about: the size of your club. Obviously, smaller clubs, cash might be a simpler way to do it. How complicated your club transactions are. If you're running tournaments and all kinds of things, aside to just your day-to-day, Saturday games, you might want to look at accrual. Whether you've got the resources to manage it. So there is more work involved to stay on top of it. So you need the treasurer, or maybe a paid role within an association or a club to manage your accounting, bookkeeping side of things, and whether you can use an electronic system to help make it a bit easier, which we'll touch on next. GST, we'll just quickly brush over that. Obviously, need to determine whether what your income thresholds are for not-for-profits, which most clubs, associations will be. That $150,000 a year turnover is the limit. If you are required to be registered for GST, you'll have an ABN number, and your GST will be paid on most goods and services that you sell, so your fees, and you'll recoup GST credits on your expenses. If you're unsure, you should consult with a qualified accountant or finance manager to get advice on what's the best way to set up for you. So chart of accounts, so we're setting up our accounts for the club. Really recommend that we start and try and keep it as simple as we can. Your chart of accounts is the list of names of accounts that you will identify and use to record your ins and outs. Keep your chart of accounts as simple as you can, as I said, and review and revise as you need. So as the club grows, or you start doing new things, new revenue streams, or incurring other expenses, you'll look to grow your chart. What I think is really important to note is you really want to be able to identify your main income generating activities. So your registration, if you run tournaments, stadium entry fees, and also have expense lines that you can allocate accordingly to. That way it makes it easy when you go to reporting to be able to see our tournament, we earn this much income, and then easily see the expenses that are related to it. So you can, come the end of the tournament, you can do a review and see whether it was a profit generating program or it costs money. And then that can help you moving forward in your next period of budgeting. Accounting software, there's a lot of systems out there now, and a lot of it is all cloud-based. I've got experience with a number of these. We at BV use MyOb, which works quite well. Xero, big fan of Xero if you're smaller or even probably a bigger club. I think it's got capability to manage what you need. Really intuitive software. Your bank feeds can be set up automatically, so you don't have to go and do a bank rec the old way where you're importing all your transactions. Each morning when you come in, you've got new feed from the day before of all the transactions that went through your bank, and then you can easily just allocate them, and you can set up automated so it can pick up bank fees or recurring transactions that happen regularly. The system will identify what it is, and then you can just hit OK and allocate accordingly. Using these kind of softwares significantly reduces the workload of the treasurer or the other people managing the finance department. It protects the cash and assets of the club by keeping solid records. Makes things significantly easier for everybody who needs to pay you or receive funds you need to pay out. Again, you can automate a lot of the processes with your bank by just preparing it in your software, creating a file and uploading it into the bank to pay. It also improves the quality of the reports that we generate, and it's much quicker to be able to run a report out of the system, not having to run spreadsheets and update each month before a committee meeting. That sort of leads us to the next thing, which is our reporting to the committee or the board. It's important to regularly report your financial situation of the club, the actual performance, to the management committee. We'd suggest doing this on a monthly basis where possible. It's also important to compare the performance versus your budgeted performance. So looking at what we said it was going to be, and then once we start, the season's underway, comparing to how we budgeted. At a minimum, you should supply an up-to-date profit and loss statement, and if possible, a balance sheet each month. The committee may also require bank reconciliation, a list of creditors, so people who owe the club money, and a list of debtors. Creditors list of people that the club owes, and debtors a list of people who owe the club. This will help the committee make decisions whether we need to, chase, say, a sponsor who's committed and you've produced signage and they're getting the benefit, but they haven't paid their bill, and the committee can make decisions about how they tackle those kind of issues. Also helps managing the cash flow to know we've got this money due to come in next month. We can afford to spend the money to repair a new backboard or a new rim or something. Information contained in these reports enables the committee to get a clear picture of both the position of the club at a certain point in time and the performance over a period of time. They then use this information to make decisions, as we've just touched on. Where actual performance varies unexpectedly from budget, it's important that the treasurer is called on to advise the management committee and discuss how we're going to manage this process, manage this issue. Is it something we think is going to fix itself over time, or do we need to make some changes to our operations to ensure that we stick, close to budget? Perfect example of this is the situation we're in now with COVID-19. Obviously, no one saw this coming, and it's completely changed our businesses or our clubs. Effectively, revenue stopped on a single day. We got told to stop, and that was it. All our revenue streams stopped. A lot of expenses continue. Not all. Some are tied, obviously, to games, but some expenses do. For associations who have got staff, some really tough decisions to be made, and that's where the committee or the board play an integral role in helping guide the club or association through those times. Know from personal experience, it can be quite daunting as the treasurer to have to present unfavourable financial reports to the committee, but it's important that the treasurer does do this and does it regularly. Don't sit on bad reports or bad numbers, you need to advise the committee as quickly as possible. One, so that they can help you work through the issue, but two, as it's their responsibility and it rests with the whole committee, it's important that they've got the full information about where the club's at. We'll quickly go over profit and loss and balance sheet. Most people will be pretty aware of what these are. Profit and loss statement shows the performance of the club over a period of time. Reports which are generated from accounting software are preferred. We can run these kind of reports in Excel, but we then increase the chance of human error, so calculation errors, and it just loses a little bit of credibility because, as it's just touched on about reporting bad figures, it might be tempting just to say, oh, we think we're going to get this bit of money coming in, so we'll put it in the accounts. Whereas in the accounting software with two-sided entries, it's almost not impossible, but it's much trickier to sort of have human interference with numbers. Also much quicker, these kind of reports, P&Ls, can just be a click of a button and the software will generate reports instantly for you. Balance sheet, so as opposed to showing performance over a period of time, it shows the actual position the club's in at a point in time. So at 30th of April here, we're showing what our assets are, our liabilities, and our accumulated funds. Again, we suggest that you prepare these on a monthly basis. There's a little bit more work involved, but again, if you're running accounting software, these can be produced at the click of a button. It helps management identify potential cash flow issues. If we're sitting on a big debtor pile where we're not collecting our receipts in a timely manner, or alternatively, we've got a big creditor listing, we might have some money in the bank, but the creditor list is huge. We know that we've got some bills to pay, and the management committee can work through those type of issues. Budgeting is a really important part of the cycle. It allows the committee to plan for the year ahead by identifying how much money the club expects to generate and the costs they'll incur to deliver these programs. The management committee will decide if they're going to use a conservative approach, which is generally the way to do it, especially in a not-for-profit club situation. In this kind of conservative approach, you'd look to underestimate your income and overstate your expenses. Also, generally going to look to run a pretty close to break-even position, unless you know that in a couple of years you need to do some major capital works. You might look to, generate some profit over the next few years to build up your bank account so you're ready to do some works in the future. It can take several attempts to get your budget to an acceptable position. It's not unusual for clubs to review its operational capex expenditure in light of budget. So you prepare a budget, it looks like it's going to produce a deficit, you're not making enough income, so you might have to go back and review, court hire fees or insurance, repairs and maintenance that you had planned. Maybe you can't afford to do it this year. The important thing when preparing your budget is understanding your income and expenses. So first, look to identify and list all the sources of income and all the likely areas of expenditure. Separate those items, work out if they're operational, so in your day-to-day running of the club, or if they're capital. So you're looking to do capital works, as we touched on, looking to get new rings or new backboards or something like that. Maybe you need a heap of new balls. So that's a capital budget where it's not so much an income or an ongoing cost. It's a spend of to purchase some assets for the club. General principle: you should ensure that total expenses are covered by total income for the year, where possible. Obtain or make estimates for all budget items. So sometimes you don't know exactly how much something's going to cost, so you've got to make a judgment call. Some things to help you out is looking at last year's financial statements or budgets, and they're often the best guide and the best starting point for you when you start preparing this year. We touched on overstating expenditure. It's also important to consult with the groups within your club. So the people that know best, the treasurer may not be 100% across how a program runs. So it's best to talk to those people who run the programs to understand why the expenses are there. Are we doing it the best we can? Is there alternatives that we can look to? Especially if you're going back and finding that the club, the initial budget is producing a deficit and you need to try and find some savings, it's important to get in and talk to those people, talk to coaches or the people that are incurring the costs, and help, work with them to find ways to save some money. Most important thing for me is when you're preparing your budget, you're obviously making assumptions. You're making calls on how much income you're going to generate or how much the expenses are going to be. Really prudent to document your assumptions. So we've got a little table here which sort of lists them out. The way that it also helps when we get into the year to go back, and when we're reporting as to why it's different to budget, we can go back and see what we based it on. So for example, this year, we will have predicted that our registration fees were going to grow by 5% and, applied that through our revenue. And then COVID-19's hit. We've missed half a season, but we can always go back and see how we made the assumption. So really important step. It'll help not only as you go when you're preparing reports, but it also adds a level of cover. If you present the assumptions to the committee along with the budget, it helps them understand what you've made, how you've developed the budget, and they can ask questions and sort of challenge some of the assumptions. But if everyone agrees that the assumptions are fair, then it's a good way to move forward and make sure everyone's on the same page. Forecasting. So a bit different to budgeting. Budgeting we do at the start of the year in preparation for the year ahead. Forecasting is more when we start to have some actual results to show, and we start to use that to predict how we'll end up at the end of the period. Key to forecasting is to review results regularly, identify where your variances are, and then implement strategies early to ensure that the budget will be met. This is even more important in the current COVID-19 situation that we're in. As we said before, no one could have foreseen what's happened, and at the moment we're still in a tricky spot to forecast because we don't know when basketball will be back. Again, as you're doing these forecasts, continue to make your assumptions and document them. So at the moment, for example, the only real forecast that we can do with any certainty is our worst case scenario, which is no basketball for the rest of the year. So at the moment, the forecast that I'd be preparing is how does the year look if we don't get any more registration income, if we're not running any programs, what are our committed expenses that we have to pay no matter what. Obviously, a lot of expenses can be stopped. And that, the assumptions around those decisions that I make in my forecast, I'll document them so that when I'm presenting to a committee, we can say, this is what it's based on. And if they've got questions or challenges, we can work through them. Then as time progresses and, the government are releasing information quite regularly, as we get a better idea of when we might be back, then we can start to work from our worst case closer to our actual case. So we're back in June, we're back in July, we can start to work backwards from there and, start putting that income back in for registrations that haven't been collected yet. Also things like, maybe collected your registrations before this happens. Been able to run the season, so there might be credits, there might be some refunds. All these kind of things should be factored into your forecast. In terms of COVID directly, I've just worked on this little spreadsheet which we'll go over. Important to assess the current year impact of the shortened season and identify areas where variances to budget will occur, both income line and also expenses. So not only are you going to have reduced registrations potentially, but you're also some of that will be counted by reduced court hire fees, referee fees, if you're not running as many programs. I'm just going to try and open up another screen here, so just bear with me. Okay, so this is, hopefully everyone can see this. This is a little thing that we've put together here. If we just turn this back. Okay, so our normal budget here, this is what we planned for the year. So $10,000 of registration fees, team sheets, sponsorship, canteen. You can see there, court hire fees as the expenses, producing a surplus of $1,500, so a little over break even. Now we're in a situation where our normal 18-game season has been reduced, and we can sort of play with this figure as we get more information. So let's just work on a really simple, we're only going to play 9 games this year, so 50%. We can see here that that's impacted our team sheet income. It's reduced it by half. It's also reduced our court hire fees, team fees, and referees. So it's halved that income and expenses. Sponsorship, we're sponsored by the local hotel, and they've had to shut due to COVID-19, and they've told us that they can't sponsor us this year. So they're our major sponsor, so we're only going to pick up a few of the smaller sponsors, so we're going to drop that to 10%. That's going to change our sponsorship figure here. So instead of 2.5, we're only going to get 250. And then registrations is a big one. This is sort of, everyone's going to have different stages where they're at. Some haven't registered, some have already collected all their fees, but potentially you're going to have to push credits or push some of that to next year. So in this instance, we'll just go with 50%. So you can see there that our registration fees have reduced by half. These yellow boxes, we've got to make some calls on these ones. So merchandise, people are a bit tight. They don't have the money that they had due to, job losses and things. So we're only going to sell half of what we thought we were. At this stage, it looks like we're going to get a $1,000 grant from the government to help us through, and sundry income, we're not going to have anything there. Insurance still going to cost us $1,000 for the year. Our merchandise stock, let's say we've already bought the stock, we just haven't sold it all yet. Referees, we've already done. We plan to do some repairs and maintenance, $500, but you know what, we're struggling. We're going to have to cut that back to $200. Telephone costs are the same, and our sundry. Now, this is an interesting one. Is there going to be additional costs, which it looks like there is, for us to get back playing basketball? There's going to be hand sanitizer, wipes, all kinds of things that we're going to need. So our actual sundry costs are going to increase from what was just, small bits and pieces to now a pretty substantial line. So we're now forecasting that for this year, we're going to make a $2,500 loss based on the information at hand. So happy to share this model around to everyone. Obviously, people have got more, you might have tournaments or things, and it's quite easy to add those lines to the model, but it's a very simple way of looking at how you might go about forecasting the rest of the year. Then I think it's important as well, not just to look at the next 7 months. It's important to look long term, because this is not going to turn around, in a short space of time. Even when we come back, it's going to be a challenge. There's going to be, people are not going to have the disposable income they had. So some players may decide they just can't afford to play anymore. There also may be safety concerns, and there may be impacts from a club point of view that we just can't play as many games as we used to. So we really need to look at how we're going to return the club from where it was, work through these challenges and get back to where we want to be. So this is more a 3-year forecast. So similar to what we just looked at here, we've plucked some numbers in of how we think we're going to finish up this year. Then we start to look at next year. Our Rego, we start to get back up there, but we've lost some players over time. So we're not quite going to generate the same revenue we had. Our sponsorship, we're going to get a bit more, but not back to the level that it was pre-COVID. And then we can work through our expenses based on this. So, our costs from game to game go up. Merchandise, we're going to just not buy too much this year, and repairs and maintenance will keep going, and we'll get close to break even next year, but not quite there. And then hopefully 2022, we start to return back to normal. So important to look beyond the next few months and look long term at how we can return the club to where it was. Final thing that we'll just sort of go over in some detail here, financial controls. So these are the processes and procedures that you put in place to ensure that you're managing your finances. Again, it's important for the whole committee to be involved in this. It's not a case for the treasurer to sort of implement all these things. It's probably more important for the committee to be confident that these procedures and controls that they put in place mean that they can trust the treasurer and the processes to deliver safe financial operations for the club. So each control that you put in place should sort of help to satisfy one of these criteria. So completeness, ensuring that all transactions are recorded, included in the reports of the club. Accuracy, as it, as it is, not too much to report there, making sure that what we put in is right and correct. Authorization, so this is around setting up authorizations on who has control to do things like spend money, handle cash, do the banking, enter information into the accounting software. Validity, ensure that invoice is for work permitted or products received by the club. So again, this comes back to authorization a little bit. Existence, ensure that the existence of assets and liabilities are actually there. So has a purchase been recorded for goods that have not yet been received, and do all the assets actually exist? Common one here is things like basketballs or equipment. It might have held it for 10 years, and the balls, they got old and ratty, but they're still in the balance sheet as being on hand. But we might have lost, half the balls that we have in the balance sheet. So it's important to make sure that we regularly review the existence of our assets. Handling errors, so ensure that procedures are in place to ensure errors don't occur in the system, and if they do, they're identified and corrected. And segregation of duties, so ensure that certain functions are separated. This is probably mainly focused on cash and banking. So potentially someone who prepares the payment in the bank account, it's authorised by another member of the committee, so that we've got that segregation. That not only helps the club and the committee, but it also adds a layer of protection to the treasurer or the person who's making payments. We should implement these procedures at each stage of financial management. Some of the questions that can be asked are, as listed here. How well are the financial aspects of the club managed? Are the club operations protecting the club against disasters, internal theft, or unfavourable external audits? How comprehensive are management practices? Are the financial records accurate? And we've got a list of things that we can look over. Clubs with sound financial management will be saying yes to most of these questions. Some general questions: is the chart of accounts used, which we touched on earlier? Yes. Are we giving enough adequate information to management? Do we use budgets and cash projections which are compared to actual results? Do we investigate when there's discrepancies? Do we understand the form and content of the financial statement? So important for management committees, if they're receiving reports and they have questions they don't understand, ensure that you ask questions. It's no point sitting there and thinking about it and not asking the question, even though you might feel like it's a silly question. It's important to ask. Are we producing the information regularly? There's no point in producing it once every 6 months, because by the time it's reported, it might be too late, and the club could be in severe financial distress. Important also to ensure our insurance coverage is in place. Now, I know we have the BV policies, but clubs still should review their own risk and make sure they have adequate cover. A lot of things here. We won't go over them all, but cash receipts, are we depositing cash on a daily basis, or is it being held somewhere? Are cash sales controlled by cash registers, or are people just using, a little container or a petty cash box? Just want to limit the potential for cash to be handled. And with COVID, I think, there's a big push for a cashless society and for people to be tapping. So maybe it's time to explore some of those options for door entries and things like that. Spending cash, petty cash is a very easy one for money to be mishandled. So important to have procedures in place about how we handle cash. Bank reconciliations, are we preparing them monthly? And is it prepared by someone other than the person who authorises payments? Important to have multiple people reviewing them, so that if money is being mishandled, it's picked up quickly. And then petty cash, where are we keeping our cash? Is it safe? All those kind of things. Accounts payable, do we verify that the total of accounts payable agrees with the general ledger? So this is, again, some of our accounting software work, making sure that things are lining up. Are expense reimbursements requests submitted properly and approved before payment? So if someone asks to be reimbursed for some money they spent, does it go through the correct checks, or is someone just paying it as soon as it's lodged? If we buy goods, does someone count them? Make sure it's all received and it's all in good order. Important step. And then for those associations, potentially clubs with employees, all your normal HR checks and balances. Do we maintain personal files? Is that access limited? And ensuring the accuracy of your payroll. So that's pretty much it for today in terms of what I've got on the list. So I'm not sure how many questions we've got, but I'm just having a look at the chat now. We can start to have a look. So a question around GST position on income received for referees. So this is a really sort of tricky one. We have spoken to a number of people, and the general consensus is that the ATO, there's either probably two options. One, they either know about the handling of it and are happy with it, and sort of turn a blind eye to it, I guess. Or the other option is that they don't know about it. The tricky part for this is if we were to go ahead and look to have a private ruling done, it could potentially change the way it's treated at the moment, which would, the flow-on effect of that is having to on-charge that cost to players, the extra 10%. Maybe that's one that we can take up offline, Michelle, and have a chat about. Tony, I've seen your question here about game day breakdown of fees versus court hire referee costs. We actually do have that, and that was something that we discussed this morning about putting in today, but it's something that, because of COVID, we really want to probably add a couple of elements to it, so that not only can you use it for recording game day costs and income expenses and use it as a recording method, but I think it's really important to use it as a forecasting method. The way that we come back to basketball, is going to be different to the way that we know it. So there will be additional costs. There may be less games played in a period of time. So it's important to do that modelling to work out, is it viable to run competitions the way that they're looking. So maybe just wait and see with that one, and we'll try and get something out in the next week or so. In terms of any templates and things that are put together, I'll get that circulated out to everyone in the next day or so. And the presentation is available. I think we've recorded this one, so we can send out the links for people to watch that. And we can certainly share the PowerPoint as well. In terms of asking stadiums to have FPOS facilities, not 100% sure on that one. Maybe leave that one with us, and we can make sure that we factor that into any future planning that we have. I think that's it in terms of questions. As I said, what we'll look to do is put a bit of a questionnaire out there so people can raise financial issues or finance management issues they may have. And if we find that there's a common theme across clubs and associations, we'll look to do another follow-up session with a bit more detail around some particular items rather than this one, which was quite broad. That's it. So thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you can get along and attend another BV webinar, but thank you for your time.